Good evening. It's 7:02. We'll call the November 18th meeting to order for the Master Plan Implementation Committee. First order of business, public comments. Hearing none. Moving on to approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
They went out a while ago. I'm sorry I didn't resend them. No, sorry.
Okay.
That was, October 15th, correct? That was the last meeting?
I think so.
Is it possible to put them up on the screen?
It is.
He's got
That's
them.
a good idea.
I can email them.
I'm actually trying to log into my email.
I can read them really fast. It wasn't,
That would be great.
well, actually, I can't read them really fast because what happened at the last meeting was we went through prioritized strategies and goals and commented, and Mike did the best job of capturing opinions and what was going on. And I asked him to integrate his, responses into the minutes. So it's probably better if Mike could get them up.
I do remember, I did read it, I just needed
I
a
was
refresh memory.
It's, the date of her email
there we go.
is,
I got it.
Before
Right, and I saw
October
you,
24th.
you're coming back, I don't think I saw anything from Mike.
Okay.
Sure I didn't. Yeah, that's what you said.
the bottom button, oh, they changed it.
Okay.
I think that's the one, yeah.
All right. So these are the minutes sent. Yeah, these have all the strategies in here.
Okay, so what I did was read in what Mike emailed me.
So I emailed a list of strategies which included the adds and the removes. And then I did another little exercise just adding strategy titles, which we can look at after. So it basically looks at chapter, it looks at the strategy as a whole, and then it gets into specific strategies based on priority for these. So what I sent was just strictly the priority strategies, not necessarily that background, but it has everything that I sent out. So there's a lot to read. But the intention of this evening was to go through that and then generate a little bit of discussion and some other bullet talking points based on chapter for the report out. So I have a couple notes, and then I guess we can go into the chapters a little further in the next item. I don't know if we need
Essentially, we want to know if this is okay for the minutes. We can then discuss from here.
Right,
Is there
yeah.
any changes or corrections for these minutes?
I couldn't tell you.
It was complicated, yeah.
No, I think in terms of documenting, which is always important, I think they're good. It says what we did, what we didn't do, right? We did some removals, and I think it's good.
Okay. Anybody?
I'll move to accept them as written.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. So moving on to our next item.
You sent that along too, and I, for some reason. I can't see it.
This, I didn't send this yet.
No.
Because
No.
I'd worked on it, and then I lost it.
You
And
lost?
so then I had to rebuild it. So,
Oh, my gosh. It's tragic.
So I want to run through each chapter. I don't necessarily want to talk about every strategy, but I want to talk about bullet point conversation items, what's important to get across. From the report out, I hope you're blocking out like 45 minutes. because it is gonna take time to run through these.
No.
Yeah.
I think it's a priority for everybody.
It is, I mean, these various committees keep saying, we're looking forward to it, we want to
Yeah.
know what we're supposed to be doing and how this relates to us and our charge, so.
So with this, right, so we're gonna have, this will be for every chapter. Chapter, some bullet points, I only added a couple, hopefully we generate a couple more for tonight. The actual strategies. I am going to add a column next to the strategies for associated committees, right?
That's a good
So
idea.
who's gonna be a part of this? And I think that will help lead to the further conversation of how do we get this done? Is it a super committee? Is it something that's strictly planning board related, right? Which just means putting it in front of them, seeing if it's on their radar going forward, and if not, how do we get it on the radar? Those types of things, so.
But, yeah, you might want the planning board to take the first brush of it anyway.
Well, I have spent quite a bit of time, I shouldn't say I, the planning board, with their consultant, who is Larry Smith, formerly of PVPC, now an independent consultant because he retired from PVPC. They really embraced all of this. What I did was take out the goals and strategies that identified the planning board as part of the areas of responsibility. And I entered into a conversation with the whole planning board, and then they said, we really need Larry present. So that was one planning board meeting, then the next planning board meeting, and I emailed Larry in advance. He gave me tons of feedback.
Okay.
Now, very helpful in my opinion. I think the importance is what's been done, what couldn't be done, why it couldn't be done, what could be done, okay? So those are the ideas I went forward on. I don't know if you want to go strategy by strategy and let me jump in, or how you want to do this.
I think, yeah, let's go, we'll go chapter to chapter, right? Because, I mean, are yours broken out by chapter? The ones
They're
that-
broken up by this order.
Okay, yeah, so as we go down, we can just
Yeah.
chime in with what we have for updates. So chapter 1, housing, right? I think the important thing here was creating affordable housing opportunities in Southampton. Attention needs to be put on creating affordable housing opportunities in Southampton, including an active encouragement of developers and builders. So we went through, right, we identified all these strategies, but one thing I did change here, 1-4D, because we technically had it completed, was adopt a zoning bylaw such as a new inclusionary zoning bylaw, which provides one or more incentives to developers to choose to include affordable housing units in new housing developments in Southampton, right? So if the bylaw we have today doesn't work, then we should look at a new one or a revised one.
Right.
So as feedback to that, because at the last planning board meeting, what we're doing is revising our zoning bylaws. It's been going on for quite a while now. And a couple of people have jumped into the conversation or the discussion, and these are people on the ZBA. And they're specifically Ryan Gillagher, who is the chair, and Jerry Swanson, who has been on the ZBA for a good deal of time. And they've really gotten involved, which is really great. And because Ryan agrees that his professional activities is as a developer, I asked him, what's this whole concept of inclusionary zoning and getting affordable housing, et cetera, and what are the barriers? And the problem is this. They are concerned that, and I've told you this before, that some developments are, high-end housing that is perhaps large, and big, and expensive, and beautiful, and attractive to a certain kind of buyer, and that buyer may not be thrilled if there was a more affordable house on this same lot. That is essentially what he's saying. So whether we could change that and say you can build 5 houses and after 5 you have to include one. I mean, we can all have our opinion on what that means, but that's what his response is to this.
Well, that's similar amongst the developers. That's
Yeah.
a similar sentiment.
Right.
Exactly. He feels he's representing the developers in general, yeah. Yeah, he also, quote unquote, in a public meeting said, if there's somebody that's going to do one, it's going to be me. That's what he said. He feels that he's moving in that direction. I said it's a very big priority for our town right now. We have a real need for inclusionary housing. So that's one point I want to make. The other point, if you remember, and I know some of you were at the public hearing of the planning board a couple of meetings ago, where the developers who already own the property just a dab south of JP's restaurant, it's the open field. Are you aware that they want to put on they're talking about having it on the warrant of a town meeting to change the zoning of that particular property. Everybody know which property I'm talking about? The open field, across from the cemetery. Lots of people attended. The room was nearly packed, and some people came and left because they didn't want to be in the front row. And they went home and watched it from TV. Friends of mine did that. Every single person that spoke, except for the developers, spoke with concerns about why this wouldn't be changed, why the zoning wouldn't change for this. And 100% of the planning board people present, spoke and said, we're going to listen to the public, and the public is not in favor of zoning change for this property. But the developers already own it. It's zoned residential, and they said publicly, we're going to build something on that. They're going to build affordable housing. I'm looking at you, Jim.
I'm looking at you back.
Do you think that was in earnest? I thought that was sort of
I have
like
no
a
idea.
threat.
I have no idea.
He said, you're not going to let me build Dunkin' Donuts, then I'm going to put affordable housing. If I did
Don't
not-
threaten the town with a good time then, right? Because we're in need of affordable
Yeah,
I know, but I did not, I thought, I had.
I don't know how to read it.
I
Just
did
saying.
not, my interpretation immediately was that it was a threatening statement he had, and that he was probably quite shocked that it was so well received.
Well,
I was going to say, was there a standing ovation after
Yes,
the...
yeah.
I mean, Janet jumped up and said, thank you, we need affordable housing in town, kind of thing, so, yeah. So,
Yeah, threat or not, I don't know what to say. He may still, they, because there were three of them, may think that that was just the small hearing and that you go to the town meeting and it's going to be very different. I don't know what to say. I do
it
believe,
still does have to go to town meeting, even
if
though...
they choose to,
Yeah,
they may withdraw that.
okay.
We don't know for sure. It would still have to go to town meeting for the zoning bylaw change. But my feeling, frankly, is that the housing...
Two-thirds passing it.
Yes.
Yeah, that the housing commission should consider contacting these individuals and having conversations with them. I know you've been doing that. And saying, we heard in a public way that you've said that, threat or not, that you are interested in doing this. And we also talked about mixed-use housing, and I think that's later on.
4E.
Yeah, and so there was reference to the fact that there's a big project going on in North Amherst. Is anybody familiar with that?
The old Coles
Yes.
lumber area. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was actually there
Is
last
that
week.
housing?
Mixed use.
Mixed.
So like commercial and housing?
Commercial and housing. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's above, higher up, it's going to be affordable housing and
Right.
apartments and whatever.
Second floor and-
So, now the other thing you should know that the planning board drove down my throat, the barrier is this, that we don't have wastewater treatment in our town, that we don't have the
Right.
infrastructure, and that's
Right.
the primary issue.
Not for affordable, for multifamily. You're talking about mixed use.
Mixed use,
Okay.
and when we get down to that. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about all of this
Okay.
that I know of.
That's good. That's a good point.
The
and I-
planning board is on board to work on this, but they don't want to redo things they've already done.
Right.
I think, just two comments. I think we have to somewhere, and maybe it's there and I'm just not seeing it. We've just got to come out, it was the revised definition for elderly housing, but the whole notion of affordable housing versus low-income housing has to be clearly put forth and defined, because immediately, and that's where some of this, I think, attitude comes from, in terms of, feeling like, we're letting the riffraff in next door or something. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's what it feels like, and that's, that's a very discouraging thought. But nonetheless, people, I think, automatically don't understand necessarily what affordable is versus low income. So somewhere that needs to be brought out and made clear. And then
better things for me to fall back on.
Yeah, and then one of the things on, wherever it was, sorry, on 4D, where incentives to developers who choose to include, that's the point, they're not choosing to
Right.
include. So I don't like that wording of choosing to include, it's like to encourage them to be proactive and take a chance.
Which number are you on?
4D.
4D. okay.
Yeah, I mean, they're not choosing to include, that's part of the problem, so.
Attention, so I did see that in my little note here, attention needs to be put on creating affordable housing opportunities in Southampton, including an active encouragement, right? And so I did have a conversation with Ed about the 9-unit rule, and, it was kind of an off-the-cuff conversation. He goes, well, then change it to 5, change it to 6, right? I mean, there's only, if 9 doesn't work, then maybe the town needs to fall back and look at 6 or
But
5.
if they do it in 2 stages, let's say, they build whatever the limit is without having to include an affordable house, and then 3 years later, they develop, the next set of properties, that's not one and the same? Or that's
I
2
thought
different, so
there
they
was
build another 9?
I thought there was a clause in the bylaw for these developments, it's got to be developed within a certain number of years.
Okay.
And remember, time is money too, so as a developer, if you have a piece of land and you start and develop half of it, let it sit. The longer you let it sit, the more money you're losing as a developer. Land just sitting there is not.
Okay.
There's also a timetable if you're buying property too, right? So if you're buying property in a development like that, you would want to know when is that big pile of dirt going to turn
Yeah.
into a house, right?
Sure.
Because if you hear 2 years, you may not want to buy that house.
Exactly, and you also wouldn't want development to be taking place after
That's
you
right.
put, and got your mortgage for your whatever $650,000 house that,
There's a
You
big
know,
field
and there's
across the way.
exactly,
Is that going to be a
that's-
field all the time? or is it gonna
and
be
what is going to be
outdoor?
going in
What's
there.
gonna-
And when, as a buyer, you might want to look and say, what's the overall picture of this development? Oh, that's not coming till 3 or 4 years from now? That might be a problem as a potential buyer.
Yeah.
I think Chris is really on the money in terms of what we want to believe is what is happening in Southampton. Are we a high-end community like a Wilbraham or a community that's looking to build really big fancy houses? Or are we a welcoming community with the rural agricultural aspect that while some people might want a $650,000 house, some people are really
Some
happy with
people
their
want- yes.
$250,000 or $350,000.
Sure, well, but in addition to that, I mean, I think I'm on so many committees, I can't even tell you where I've heard this, but I've heard it in my various meetings, that it's, the idea is not, and I know elderly is used there and it's in here, so I guess we keep that, but it's also the first-time home buyers. I mean, Megan, right?
That's right.
It's, as we've said in other meetings, the teachers, the fire department personnel, people that are working with us, that are part of our community, that work and provide services for us here, and they cannot afford to live in town. And that's affordable housing. It's not because anybody's low income or anybody else. It's just,
It could be
This is what
built
we
like
should
with the
be-
same essential quality and look, only on a smaller lot than the smaller
It's a
house.
smaller
I mean,
size
that's
maybe,
what
but
makes
it's-
it
what
affordable
makes
as
it-
opposed to
Right,
something
but
made of,
When you talk
Doesn't have
about
to be
zoning, we're
painted
talking about,
purple, you know?
if you,
Yeah.
you could have districts or areas in town that allow for smaller lots. And so a builder who needs to make a certain profit, if there's so many acres to develop, and you put 9, 10 units in a cul-de-sac,
But
could you put 20
But-
smaller units?
you can't, because we don't have public sewer. Every single lot has to have its own sewer.
Understood, but
So-
understand that the size of the sewer and the septic is
Septic.
determined by the number of bedrooms, the
Yes.
number of square
Yes.
footage. So if you have a
Yes.
smaller home, 2,
Smaller
3 bedroom, you have a smaller septic, and you can make more. So there's ways, or if you have a development, there's ways to, you can even have like a community septic. So there's certainly ways to do it.
well, yeah,
It's
we had
it's
that
possible,
presentation
and the
of
developer can make their money,
systems.
because they're not in the business to lose money.
Yeah.
They can make their money, it's just you're making less profit, but on more units.
We're making the same
Totally
amount of
agree.
profit, yeah.
Right, the problem is that's a little bit harder. It's much easier to just, we know what we can do to make a certain amount of money. We can make a 3,500 square foot house on a certain size lot in a cul-de-sac, and we make money. So that's where the encouragement piece comes in. That's where the from 9, from 10 to 5 maybe, or even 4. You really encourage, because you're limiting the amount of units, you really encourage creative thinking. None of us likes to do something that's a little bit harder, or takes a little
Right.
more effort. We're just going to do what we know how to do, and we know how to do it well.
I think from what you've told us in the past, where the Housing Authority has attempted to invite various developers in, talk with them about stuff, it would be great if 1, 2 jumped in and said, we're in, let's try this. let's
Well,
work on
we
it."
did have some interest from a couple, but the thing is, again, the zoning has to change to really make it work.
Is there some?
So if it's 140 feet of frontage required, it's not going to work. That's what we're talking about.
But there is a cluster bylaw?
Yeah, there
in
is.
town.
I didn't bring it with me. I didn't bring the zoning bylaw. Did you feel specifically that that we could change specific zoning that's not?
Either if there's the cluster, expand it so it goes beyond its current boundaries, or and
Jim, this coming Wednesday, wait a sec, what's today? Tomorrow's Wednesday.
I know,
The
Thursday.
first Wednesday in December, that we're going to be reviewing more of or the second Wednesday, one of the two, and I can send you the email. We're going to be back on these bylaws review. Would somebody from housing like to come and look at this just very closely to see? And don't forget, Ryan Gilher will probably be there, and he's a developer.
I would love
He's
to
the
come,
right
but I
one.
already have a meeting booked for that
Yeah,
night,
I'm
so
sorry.
it can't
So I
be
don't know if
me,
somebody
but
else could go.
it could be Chuck or Janet. I could see.
Yeah. Chuck,
I don't-
which Chuck is this?
Kinnicky?
Oh, son Chuck? Okay, yeah. I mean, seriously, it would be great to get that input in order to see if we can propose the change and hear it specifically from the combination of the
Yeah.
planning board people, the zoning board people, and this guy Larry Smith, and kind of work that out. So in terms of presenting this to the select board, which is going to happen before then, right? The date of the select board presentation. I'm just wondering if you could say we're trying to get together all the,
Did Larry
Decision
Smith have
making.
December 4th is that meeting? First Wednesday?
I think there's a hearing that night for one thing, so I think it's the following Wednesday that they're doing it, which
The
is
11th.
11th, correct. Do you have something that night?
I'll see if I can get out of it.
It's the 11th.
No, I might be free the 11th. We'll talk after.
Sure. What did you say? Did Larry
I was
Smith have
wondering
to say?
if Larry Smith had anything to say about this. He said he chimed in on that.
His answer to 2.4b, well, that's up to 2. Sorry, on 1, he didn't say anything specific about housing, but when we get to 2, chapter 2, which is economic development, he had a lot to tell us. These are all his notes.
So chapter 2, economic development, invest in infrastructure and provide adequate capacity to meet the current and future needs for water, sewer, and telecom. Identify current and future areas of growth and development and concentrate efforts in those areas. So what did he have to say?
So, on 2.4b,
Yep.
he said, this would be addressed in terms of what information you require in submitted plans, as well as in the criteria that you use for approving such projects. So, to me, that was kind of a vague response in terms of specifically infrastructure improvements.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a development standpoint, if you put in your cul-de-sac development, you're required to meet roadway and sidewalk standards. You know, I think if you were to, and I've seen it in some towns, if you do a large commercial development, for instance, off of a road, sometimes that development will have to take on some signaling and like lane change construction on the street itself. But we, I think today that's not part of, the plan. I think in the future, right, if someone came in and said, I want to build a large something somewhere, that's a conversation for the town to have with them about signaling and traffic flow.
Right. My experience on the planning board so far has been that if a developer comes in and wants to do like a subdivision, there's a lot of attention paid to what is the vision in terms of, turning onto the main road, and do we have the clearance, and then we do have this sidewalk on both side law in our town, zoning board bylaw, and yet we can defer on that, and they can pay into a fund and only put the sidewalk on one side. Makes sense to some extent for a really small little cul-de-sac kind of development versus having sidewalks on both sides, but then the idea is...
Is there 2 sidewalks on the development off the Strong Road? I think there's only one.
I don't think so.
It's a long development.
I'm trying to think where that is.
There's one's off of Pleasant Street, there's one sidewalk too, there's not two.
On the left.
I think.
After Liberty Field?
Yeah.
I don't know when it was built. Was it built before or after the bylaw? I don't know.
Oh,
But the brand new ones, Gill Farm and Fisk Farm, which are going to be down off Pequot Road, both of them are the ones that have come in fairly recently. And in both cases, they've asked for, like a variance on that, and then there's this whole formula they've come up with was how much money should be paid into a fund. And the fund is meant to support the building of sidewalks, which is part of our goals eventually, towards a fund. And, developers are basically saying, and I can't help but agree, that these really small cul-de-sacs, do they really need sidewalks on both sides of the roads? That people are going to, the kids are going to ride their bikes in the middle of the road anyway if it's a really small cul-de-sac. But I think that there's a lot of attention paid to, making sure that we consider the sidewalk development, the turning, the grade, those kinds of things. I think we hire independent firms like BHB to come and be our peer reviewers. I'm certainly not the one that can help do that. And so you get these external peer reviewers that help to make sure to meet the criteria on these things.
At the end of the day, we end up owning it too, right? After a certain number of years, we review and approve and accept the street and take over management.
Right.
I think on that 24B, like if you were presenting that in front of, at the meeting, it's like, what would help maybe is to know that, okay, the current special permit process doesn't allow for X, Y, and Z. I mean, what does that really mean? Right now, whatever special permit process we have doesn't allow sidewalk and traffic improvements. I mean, other than just seeing the words on a piece of paper, what does it mean for what we don't have now, and why would this be an improvement or a change to whatever exists, I guess?
So I think the whole chapter, and when I look at all of these, I see a need for a PVPC development study or something, right? Like, all these strategies are, I think they're viable strategies, but we don't even know where to implement them, right? So chapter 2 as a whole, to me, is employ a firm to review and really tell us what we should be doing where and how to encourage it. That's, I mean, from a PVPC or some group standpoint, how do you encourage development here? How do you really lay out where the development is, where the development wants to go in the future? We can talk about that, but we're not able to guide that process.
If you're really on the money on that, I agree with you.
Well, the other thing, I think the select board, for instance, could talk about that, but, I don't know, is that something that they could do? And I think, to me, some of those decisions, you almost need kind of a third-party review to review and present results. But,
We need some level of expertise.
right, yeah, because I could say I want X built there, but I could just be making it up, right?
What I don't want to see happen is it to sort of lapse into get another study.
Yeah, that's my fear, is that
Yeah.
months and years will go by again, and people will say, hey, but what about economic development in town? And how do we bring business to town? And we've got to take some beginning steps
Yeah.
somehow, whatever those might be.
Yeah.
But that could be with a PVC PC planner sitting at the table with the group and
And do we have a new
Making
person?
recommendations.
If this guy's retired, do we have a new person?
Oh, he's still consulting to the planning board as an consultant. We still have that guy Ken Comia that came to the hearing. You remember him? He stood up and came to the hearing. This guy's kind of a bit more seasoned. I think Ken Comey is quite knowledgeable, but this guy's more seasoned. I think they're both good, and I think they would love to help us. Although I will say this about Larry Smith, he leaves early December and to Mexico with his wife and doesn't come back till the end of March, so he's kind of like gone during the winter months. Yeah, so that's
It's a
just
nice
one,
trip.
one thing to say. I almost feel, based on what you're thinking about, that we should condense this a little bit in terms of economic development and get like one or two things to present to the select board that are really palatable, that could be actually the
Actionable.
next step. you know?
Actionable, I mean.
Actionable, yeah.
Get this guy, talk to this guy and see if he can help us out and make a plan for that. I mean, I don't know, things just seem to take a long time in the way they go. And I just don't want to see this drag on.
Exactly, and we don't want to go to the planning board and having them go, huh? You know? Can we condense this a little bit with this particular chapter?
So I will condense and put whatever the committee feels best forward. So when I see words like encourage or selectively invest, I don't think we have the true skill set to know where that needs to be done in town. Not just us, but any board in particular, right? I don't think we have that skill set. So I get worried when we say, well, we're going to encourage commercial development here, and when you ask the question why, there isn't sound reasoning behind it, right?
yeah, that's reasonable.
Well, a couple other points to make. So if you drive north to Easthampton and go north on Route 10, what do you see? For sale, for sale, for sale on the left, correct? None of that is developable land. It's wet and it can't be developed. None of that will work. We almost should try to think about ways to use the actual developed land, like where People's is, or someplace to try to
We'll have an opportunity next year
expand,
for that.
and on top of the fact that they're already linked in to the Easthampton wastewater system. So that's like attractive in that regard. The second thing to tell you, and this is public record, is there's going to be a hearing the first Wednesday in December of another zoning bylaw change for, you know where the corner is, going south towards Westfield, Valley Road, Route 10, the Red Barn on the right, owned by Eugene Labrie. They are proposing a zoning bylaw change to make that commercial. It's currently industrial. Is that a good thing? Maybe it is. Maybe it's wonderful. Maybe to put in a mini mall or a something. Okay, is that the right thing? That's, come to the hearing and give your opinions on that. Or is that consistent with our master plan that says we want the agricultural look to our town and we want the open space look, specifically those open fields, where cows graze and orchards. I
That
don't
property,
know.
is that hooked into the Westfield sewer system?
No.
No, it's not. No, it's not. So that is something. So some people will reasonably say, is that where we want our another commercial district? Good question. Is that the right thing? Will it bring the right tax dollars in, or is this something we want to say, no, let's limit our commercial district to where we're currently zoned?
The tax dollars, commercial is charged the same rate as residential. So it's not Other than
it's-
bringing value and
Well, it's the same
maybe
rate.
jobs, hopefully, yeah, it's the same rate, but,
So if they, I'm just giving you the facts.
I mean,
These are
the
facts.
taxes on what used to be JPs are $10,000 a year. That's what it is. Now, you think about individual homes, that some of them approximate that now. That's not substantial. I mean,
In fact, one of our assessors, April West, stood up at the last hearing and talked about if the land a little bit south of JP's was to be developed as residential, the open field.
Where
the
Dunkin'
one that
Donuts
the
was
zone
supposed to go.
She pointed out that the income would be greater if it was developed as in residential housing versus commercial, based on other commercial
right,
property.
but then they argue that the use of services would be less
Yeah.
because they don't have kids in school.
Well, that isn't necessarily true, though.
No, I know,
Water
but that's
use
the
would be
argument that people use.
Yeah.
Greater.
Yeah.
So for chapter 2, how do we pare it down to something palpable or something easier?
We need verbs that are better than encourage and consider and review. We need stronger verbs, actually adopt and,
Or action
yeah, action verbs, right?
More committed action. You're right. You could just,
Yeah.
if you take out encourage, consider, then there's your action words, adopt.
I think we talked about that
Yeah.
in the past, just getting rid of all of that
Yeah.
type of language.
Can we get it down to 1 or 2 to present to the select board?
Yeah.
Well, the last two are similar. They both talk about mixed
Mixed
use.
use, yeah.
So you could combine those.
Is that a priority, though?
Well,
I mean, I guess from an economic development standpoint
I think it gives a lot of potential economic development beyond any tax or non-tax increase in that you bring more business to town, more of Southampton residents perhaps spend their money in town. You potentially could, with mixed use, offer some different types of housing development that are not currently available in town. So benefit doesn't always have to be in terms of tax revenue generated. There's a lot of ways to measure benefit.
what about focusing on 6.4A? Adopt zoning regulations that allow for greater development densities where, and drop the consider off, and adopt zoning regulations that allow for greater development densities where infrastructure. Let me see what he said about 6.4A. Did I already talk about that?
I mean, I would say the same for 2D and 2E. I think at this point there's enough to our effort of reviewing this master plan. I think we've done the considering.
Yeah, I mean, that's
You know, and now we're
Okay.
recommending adopt.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we wouldn't go there, but I mean, it could be as much, if we start getting all these things that want to go from residential to something else, or, all these zoning changes, a recommendation could be, and I'm not saying that, but it could be a moratorium on zoning changes for the next 6 months until something, I mean, you can make things very specific if you wanted to, but I just would like us to be as specific as we feel we can be, so that the people on the receiving end of this are going to feel like they got something they can put their hands on and they can go sit down and start working on it. Because
Yep,
that's
yep.
where I think that's what they're wanting to do, but they don't really know what's coming at them, I think, too, so.
They being the select board.
Select board people in town in general
Yeah.
that are listening to this, that, and other committees, Concom for one, I've heard that how many times?
Yeah, and other interested parties like developers and so forth.
Sure, yeah, everybody. So, just to get, I mean, I kind of agree with Jim that we've done the considering already. So it's-
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
everybody's looking for recommendations, and from those recommendations,
I think zoning in on 6.4A is the real core of what we need to do on this second, chapter 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
The act of
Yeah.
encouraging is sort of meaningless to what can be done to it. What does that even mean?
So the one thing that we leave out with these, the highlighted yellow options, is actual investment in infrastructure improvements. Right, so if we're talking about water, sewer, or telecom, the highlighted strategies do not address those at all.
But
So add 4B.
I think they sort of go together.
Right.
I mean, we need to make that leap into the.
But these are about, so these are about
She's right.
zoning
Whoever
though,
said that, no.
right? So the highlighted ones are just zoning. The town doesn't have to spend $1 other than the legal fees to post the meeting, right? But the actual intent of
Infrastructure.
the goal was building infrastructure. So if we want to capture 4B,
4B.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
say, and then Jim had recommended consolidating 2D and E.
Yeah.
So that would still, if you did that and added 4B, you would still have 3 items.
That's
that
good.
Highlight.
But 4B is talking about sidewalk and traffic improvements.
it's not going to bring people to town.
I
Are
mean,
you
as
at
a
2 4B or 6 4B? Which one?
2 4B.
Oh, no, I
We're
was
looking
saying
at
6
4B.
4B, okay.
6-4B gets
That's-
back to the
yes, the- what we
water and
need.
sewer thing,
Okay,
for sure.
fine.
So,
And I would
6 4B.
I would be careful because economic development means much more than the subheading there about investing in infrastructure.
yeah.
So I feel if we focus on investing in infrastructure, we're missing the whole economic development picture. So that might,
Our largest part of the conversation, though, about Chapter 2 was water, sewer, and telecom. So I keep bringing it up because it was what we focused our conversation on. If we want to switch to a zoning and a sort of regulatory bylaw, it's kind of the
it's
will of the
all
committee.
economic development in my mind. I don't know that one is
Yeah.
more valued than the other or have more emphasis than the other. They do go together because if you're talking, often if you want to create, for example, mixed use, you're talking about a more higher concentration of individuals in a certain area. So do you need, sewage requirements that require infrastructure? They're not mutually exclusive, but they're not, I don't know, to me, economic development can mean a lot of things.
So
Beyond
broaden it,
infrastructure.
define that. Define the broader meaning of economics.
So, for example, you could argue that what Francine was just saying about infrastructure to sidewalks and traffic improvements, that's actually economic development, because if you make it easier for people to come to town, they're going to more likely come to town from outside and spend their money. If you make more sidewalks and you make the town more attractive, then you bring more people who want to live to Southampton, say, I can live here, my kids can walk to school. So that's all economic development in my mind. It's a very broad.
Right, but those are included in this.
Right, but they don't have anything to do with infrastructure, those two examples I gave. But I believe they are economic development. So what I was cautioning against was tying economic development solely to infrastructure improvement, even though admittedly we spent a lot of time there. I think there's more to economic development than infrastructure. It's important, and they often will be tied together.
But, yeah.
But
sometimes-
I wouldn't want us to look at this topic through a lens only of infrastructure development, because I think we'd be limiting ourselves.
But I think often the barrier, at least what we've heard, the barrier to economic development is the lack of infrastructure, the
Yeah.
lack of sewers
Yeah.
and telecommunications and,
Yeah,
I mean,
they
so-
are definitely related.
Well, and is it part of it that we need to have the discussion in town about what, there's this schizophrenic idea that we're still a rural community, or we aren't, or whatever we want to be. But
I like that.
let's get
That
to
analogy of it, I think it's,
do we want to have a discussion in general, like what are the kinds of businesses we want to have here? Do we want, I can't think of something, good example, but do we want sort of the strip mall, look to us, or do we want a nice bookstore? Do we want to, what is it that we want in town? And that's where I don't know where that discussion happens, because that to me is the other part of the economic development. The quilt shop just moved in up here. Okay, fine, that seems like a nice little business to have in town. Why not? I can't imagine that's a big sewer or water draw. There's things like that could be put forth as kind of still promoting the character of whatever that everybody thinks the character of town is, that will encourage, that are commercial, entities that aren't going to be a big drawback on our infrastructure. So somewhere that other part of, it's not only identifying the place or whatever for specific areas for community growth, because I don't think that's really, I don't know what we're going to do about that part, but it's also the character of the kinds of businesses we want to attract to town, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, the bent could be too, agricultural development. Economic development just doesn't mean commercial development.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest pushes for agriculture development is marijuana. I was asked by some lawyer who has a lot of clients where that's their main interest in terms of their businesses. How much land is available, in Southampton that we can we can have farms that grow. Yeah, it all has to be enclosed.
That's right.
Yeah, it can't be, just out there in an
But then
open
there's
field.
the hemp builder.
And hemp is the next one. So when you talk about, it's not going to be cornfields anymore. I think people.
Well, and part of the reason it's not going to be cornfields, though, there are plenty of farmers who want land, open land, to farm produce. It's just that the land is too expensive here in Southampton. You can't. It's hard to find, and it's hard to make a living when the land is so expensive.
But that's why it would only attract people who are in those high-end kind of agricultural.
Well, I don't know. Those are the people who have stepped forward, but there are others I know who would like to farm. But it's not realistic. It's just like those of us who would like to live here but can't because the houses are being built are too expensive.
But I think to Francine's point, acknowledging what you're saying, but the economics will say those who grow cannabis or hemp or whatever can afford the land because they make such a margin on their product.
And that's fine. So we could choose, a choice could be to try to keep the agricultural nature of this town, and so what if it's growing hemp or marijuana? That still would offer, big buildings for marijuana would certainly change the
they have to be
landscape.
enclosed. Probably looking like some of those enclosed greenhouses.
Well, it doesn't
Quonset
necessarily
hut.
have to be indoors. I don't think, right?
I think
It can be
our bylaws-
fenced in.
It has to be indoors for our bylaw, I think, for the marijuana part of it.
Okay,
The hemp
because
is
I've
outside.
seen fields that just have electric fences around them, and that,
I think if we go back and read our bylaw, it's got to be covered.
I think enclosed
Electric
and with
fence and
electric
covered?
fences.
I don't think it
so.
says electric cover.
I thought they had to have some
Sentries at each corner.
real security there.
Yeah,
For marijuana or hemp?
Yeah.
for marijuana.
marijuana.
not
Oh,
for
yeah,
hemp.
okay.
Yeah, the hemp fences are just.
You're not going to get much out of them.
So I was up in Coleraine several weeks ago, and my gosh, there's tons of hemp fields up there. Yeah,
They're all over the place.
There's some in Ashfield, too.
yeah.
So,
Well, anyway, can we limit this? Can we get
So-
to Chapter 2 here?
Yeah, I'm keeping the 4A, 2D, 2E, in terms of the zoning and regulatory side. Selectively invest in infrastructure improvements to direct residential units to areas that have been identified for growth. I also added, what are the businesses we want to have? What do we want our town to be? And maybe that becomes kind of a survey direction or something, right? We originally talked about a survey and then we moved away, but
yeah.
maybe there are some areas where we really need resident input.
Well, we're going to have a town visioning I told you this before. Because of the
visioning?
master plan, yes. It's called town visioning. It's going to happen on December
open
18th.
space, yeah.
For the open space and recreation
Recreation
plan. It's
plan.
going to be an active, interactive discussion with town residents. We hope all of you will be there on Wednesday, December 18th, and that's for the open space and recreation plan.
And so, yeah, there's some overlap here with that.
Yes.
there-
But I think, but realistically, we need to tell people what that
So should we,
commercial growth could look like, or what's out there that's viable anymore. We say, well, what kind of business do you want? Well, what's viable? It's, some of it's not, it's not,
so is there any
unfortunately,
way,
it's not record stores. I mean, when you think about the things that don't exist anymore, the nice kind of clean businesses that everybody thinks, oh, people will gravitate to that, be a nice place in the community,
What are you
they
thinking?
don't.
well, I want to know, so you're doing a visioning session for open space and recreation.
Yeah.
Has the select board thought about expanding that to include other chapters in the master plan? So visioning day 1, visioning day 2?
We're going to,
Well,
Francine's
yes,
on this.
I'm just the liaison, yes, but yes.
Has it been discussed in the select board specifically
No.
as to what to do with the visioning? No.
I mean, I think economic development, it's, like of all things, of all the chapters here, the economic development, to me, sticks out as, well, that should probably have its own visioning meeting, right? Because
We
economic
could throw
development
that out.
does
Maybe that
fall
can
into
be
housing, it
have
falls into
one or
other
two.
ones as
Have a
well.
twofer. Yeah, I think that's probably
Can
a
we
good
throw that
idea.
out? Because we're going to be meeting with her sometime the first week in December.
December.
Yeah.
They're trying to set the meeting time now, and
But would they run that and support that, or is that something we would have to?
I would like to see it happen at the same time. Good Lord, how
Yeah, how many
schizophrenic can we
times
be
do
in this town?
Well, the other problem though is look when we're having it. It's around the
I
holidays. It's
know.
going to be
It's
really tough to
ridiculous.
get people there.
Totally ridiculous.
I already have a meeting.
We're going to have better cookies than
So what are we doing on the infrastructure development, A and B up there? The first ones you have there?
A and B, adopt zoning regulations that allow for greater
No,
development.
no, the other one.
She wants
Two, sorry.
two A,
Are we
two
ignoring?
A.
I was just gonna ignore them. I mean, we talked about paring down the list. The highlighted items and the strategies were the ones that were talked about first. I was just gonna exclude them.
Well, I think we should have,
One.
can we rewrite the wording, or are we
We
compelled
could
to
change, we
take
could
the
do
same
whatever we
words?
wanna do.
Can we say 24A, actively pursue infrastructure development, specifically wastewater treatment, or what was that new thing what did they call
Those
it?
mini sewers.
Mini sewers, whatever they were
systems.
called. That's, is there a way to rewrite 24A that says that? Because I think that should be pursued.
It's sort of implied in, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. Yeah, it is implied in 6.4A and
I do
6.4B.
pursue, yeah, okay. Areas identified for commercial mixed use. Does that sound good? What do you think?
I'm just gonna put growth.
Well,
Is it gonna be
no, in-
commercial, residential,
Commercial growth. Don't
manufacturing?
just say general growth.
What if
Commercial
it's
growth.
residential growth? though?
Right, what if it's a residential?
This is
cluster?
economic development, that's the chapter.
Could argue there's economic development in the
Increasing.
increasing the housing affordable, or, yeah.
Well, the studies show that it's more of a drain on municipal services than if you just encourage residential development.
And is that going to get us a question from the audience? What are the areas that have been identified for growth?
Well, that's
And there's
a good
been
question,
no,
yes.
and in terms of what,
I mean, there's the little cluster appendix drawings, right, which show areas of, your commercial bubbles, right?
I mean,
That would be what we'd have to fall back on.
presenting,
pretty-
I mean, you might want to have that as a visual aid.
Are they pretty desperate, or are they kind of concentrated.
They're where they are today. I mean, if you think about where the businesses are, that's where the bubbles are.
That's it.
Moving on to 3. Historical cultural resources. Support growth management that will protect and preserve the rural landscape, vistas, and historic resources that define the community character of Southampton. Develop a plan for how Southampton is developed and preserved. So, plan, features. Municipal, I like this one, municipal preservation plan, because it's specific. Like 1A, 1G I like because they are specific what to do. Even though 1A doesn't necessarily provide a solution, it does tell you where to go and what to do. Did he say anything on 3-4D, the zoning regulations for scenic vistas?
He
Were
did.
those in
He did.
at all?
It would be best addressed by the town purchasing the sites. Okay, this was his take on this. We can't. Actually, the reason I'm hesitating is because it seems to fall into more of the open space, natural resources chapter that he's talking about here. But basically, he said that if we as a town want to have specific open space, key scenic views, and vistas, we as a town should consider purchasing these sites or placing restriction on these locations. Versus telling someone who is a private property owner, you can't develop that spot because you're going to hinder the view of, let's take, for example, Glendale Road. Big open spaces up there, where the horses are and all that. We couldn't tell the Raymonds, you can't develop that at all because it would just hinder the view of everybody else. We can't do that to private landowners. Rather, the town...
Is it in chapter?
It doesn't matter, that was just an example.
Okay.
That was just an example. He's right, we can't tell a landowner what not to do with their land unless it's under a conservation restriction or it's under a specific, restriction. So that's the way he took for strategy 3D, 3/4D.
Okay.
So that's why I was hesitating a little bit.
I agree.
But I want to add something else here. In our master plan, as well as in our open space and recreation plan, we talk about, and we, on the open space committee, we talk about trying to identify key properties for either active conservation or for restriction, etc. And it's in all these plans, and nobody's ever done that. Nobody's ever identified what these lands are. And so when I brought that up, Larry said, what we really need to do is have a professional to help us to identify these lands. But, that's going to be costly, because we're going to have to hire somebody on a professional to help us do that. But that is something that our town needs to do, because we talk all the time about wanting to have these open vistas and having these protected lands and maintaining the certain character of our land, but we have opinions on what we like to see conserved, but we don't really have, really good data as to why we want to conserve such and such and such and such.
I would just like to also add from a Concom standpoint, we would love to have some kind of fund or nonprofit or something in which we can take care of those lands, because we are so short on money.
Did you know what happened last week?
I heard a little bit, yeah.
Okay, so a group came together. Francine was there, and Christina was there, and And I was there, and a lot of people heard about this. I think you got an invitation to come
Yes.
to this.
Yeah.
And we have the budding, very exciting beginning of a Friends of Open Space
good.
group. A board got formed within like 12 minutes.
Good.
And they're actively looking, and fundraising, I believe, will be
Good.
part of it.
Okay.
So,
For that purpose.
Oh, good.
exactly, for that, perfect. And Marla, I copied her on the activities. I know, she works really hard and whatever, but, and actually, 2 people came forward and said they want to be on Concom, specifically on
Send Marla.
Concom. Yeah, so Ed and Marla know about that, the 2 individuals that came forward that want to participate, but it is it's a gap, right?
It is.
The conservation of the lands, the maintenance of the lands, et cetera.
There's just not enough people to go around.
Yeah, exactly. So,
And money, mostly money.
okay. So anyway, that's his answer
Okay.
to, which is a little different than historical cultural, but it kind of falls into the open space piece.
So, just to recap again, so you're saying that this person's recommending a strategy rather than adopt zoning regulations, because apparently we can't, so instead pursue purchasing?
Makes sense.
Except
Or,
we can't regulate it? I mean, so...
well, if we don't own it, we can't regulate it. We can encourage
How do we
conservation.
regulate other parts of town with zoning? I mean, we set up zoning districts. That doesn't mean we own the land. The town says this is what can be done here and this is what can be done there. Those are zoning districts.
I think it's
So,
because
There's no such
this,
thing as a scenic zoning district? Is that what you're saying?
well, I think that means you're not allowed to do anything with your property.
Yeah, we have zoning
From the,
districts.
like, think about it, from the scenic standpoint, you own this giant field with a beautiful view.
Right.
What are you not allowed to do, right? What does your zoning restrict you to? Your zoning would restrict you to doing nothing other than farming. And I think, or some sort of passive type of activity.
Well, that can be zoning. Here, it says 75% of respondents to the community survey supported zoning some areas of town for agricultural and very low-density residential development, such as a minimum lot size of 5 acres or more.
Sure.
So that's a
some-
method
it
of
comes from zoning,
zoning
yes.
regulation that would steer a type of development in town.
But if it was scenically zoned, you couldn't do that. You couldn't
That's
do any
right.
of that.
That's right.
I think that's what,
This would achieve a similar thing.
Right, I think we're just giving different labels.
Yeah.
Rather than scenic, it's agricultural or something, because...
well, I think the fact that the scenic area is because there's a view, right? Because there's nothing in the way. There's probably minimal
That's right.
housing or no houses in
Well,
certain
that's
areas.
what this would achieve. A 5-acre lot would achieve a similar end.
Maybe.
Well, but that came up, though, in the discussion, because if you used my example of the Raymond Farm and all the cornfields down there and how really open and beautiful it is, even 5 acres, if you put 2 or 3 houses in it, would not look
gone.
like a corn farm.
Yeah.
Or like a cornfield anyone, right?
And I think maybe what helps keep some of it open is if you can cluster all the homes together, it has less impact on your
Yes.
Right.
forested
Yes.
areas and open space.
But unless there's education and encouragement of, hate to use the Raymonds as the example, but, to say, keep this in an agricultural restricted area or an APR, right? Am I right about this, Christina? Is this, am I barking up the right tree here to say that, we should encourage our farmers to put restrictions on their lands?
Well, that's part of it here.
Yeah.
That's part of what is written, but they have to want to do that.
What else would be scenic in Southampton?
Remember, there were scenic
There's
roads
a
that
part
were
of
identified.
some Pleasant Street.
Quite.
You see some signs in some towns, a scenic way.
Well, that's another
Yeah.
thing that was in the master plan, to
We did-
identify
and we
our scenic
didn't.
items, and we never did it.
Never
Yeah.
did.
So is scenic just something with a view?
Yes.
Who defines
And
scenic?
Right.
It's
The
not just an
Westfield
overview.
end of Southampton, on the highway on Route 10, was identified as the gateway to Southampton and keeping that
Yeah.
area.
Was that looking east?
Yes, she's just pointed out, page 51, the specific locations which were considered scenic.
Glendale Road, Ty Carmody Reservoir, Coleman Road view of Mount Tom, Gun Road view, Cook Road access, Pleasant Street, Swanson Comers view.
Yeah, well, Pleasant Street is no longer
Yeah, really.
a scenic road.
And there's an
Well,
example.
there is. It's just going-
Depends on how you define as scenic. But, I mean, that's
That's true.
to me, that's the point of, if you're gonna have scenic, what does it mean? And do you have the authority to create a scenic byway that restricts certain things?
Yeah. So that's his point. We can't tell people.
Well, and I would argue to that. So, for example, on Elm Street in Northampton is a historic area, and you cannot paint your house whatever color you want.
Well, that's a
Or you-
local historic district.
Right, so why can't we have a local scenic district?
We can,
What
but
would the
it's a
scen-
matter of passing.
So what would you be allowed to do in your local scenic district?
Scenic district?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
asking-
what
I'm
would
asking
you be
you.
allowed to do?
Right.
I've never heard
What
of
would you
such
be
a
allowed
thing.
to
What would you
do?
be allowed to do?
You would be allowed to leave the land as it is. You could farm it.
I don't know if that would go over well.
That's,
Well,
I don't think
I'm not
that-
saying it would, but there's plenty of people who live in local historic districts who are really upset because they're limited what they can do. And so this is the classic argument, right? The individual's rights versus the rights of the community.
Yeah, but it,
So if the community says we want scenic ways, is it possible, if it's possible for another community to say, we want a historic district, and it's possible there?
yeah.
So when I hear you say, Larry says it's not possible, whatever, I would argue, then how does it happen as a historical district in another town?
I'm
Where they
wondering-
do tell people how to live and how to,
Yeah, but I don't think land comes under that same classification. A conservation restriction is about the only way, and APR.
I
that
don't
you
know.
can state
I don't know,
land.
it sounds like we're speculating that land.
Well, the other
I mean,
thing,
is-
I think so.
so I have a question from historical cultural resource. Is that where we're getting the biggest bang for our buck, concentrating on scenic road designations?
That comes under open space.
Just from the
as well.
chapter
Yeah.
itself, right? I mean,
Right.
is there other strategies that may provide better outcome?
Right.
I'm wondering about looking at strategy 3.1G, municipal preservation plan. What about some sort of preservation district or preservation bylaws to go along with that, where it's maybe not as strict as a historical district, but you can encourage people to just think of preserving what's there.
Well, the options for land preservation/conservation are conservation restrictions, APRs, and they're really voluntary. I don't think we can zone them.
I don't think so either. I'm playing devil's advocate
Yeah.
because I see,
We can encourage and we can, but that's,
and do we even want to? Because these folks that if you put a scenic restriction on a certain chunk of land, you're really restricting, if
I
we
don't
could do
know
it.
what a scenic
the-
restriction
Right, what
is,
that landowner can do. And is that really
I think that was
fair to
the
that
point of this,
townsperson?
Larry Smith. We can't tell a landowner what to do if he owns it and he doesn't have a restriction on it.
And my point is, I'm not sure we can't, but I don't know if it's a good idea that we do it, regardless of whether we can or can't.
I'm wondering if it would
But
be...
to Mike's point, is this where we want to be spending all our energy?
I think 3-4C and 3-4D should just go in open space, natural resources. Just kind of whole house move them.
Which ones?
Well,
See,
The scenic
Chapter
road
3,
scene.
historic and cultural resources.
I think they belong under open space. And
I wouldn't classify a scenic view unless there's a actual historic or historic structure there. I wouldn't necessarily put it in that picture, or,
it belongs open space.
I mean, I guess maybe cultural resources if there's something that's known, but a lot of older historic cultural resources, you think of it from a cultural resource, you're excavating somewhere for a project, right? The majority of your cultural resources are in the ground, right? From, if you look at Native American sites and all this stuff, you don't even see them, they're just not known. I think if it's talking about open space, conserving open space for views or vistas or rural landscape, it should
go with the open space chapter.
Scenic roads is a little different. I think that goes more with the historical, cultural resources. Those are already
never changes.
designated.
They're already designated,
They're
they've been voted at
designated.
town meeting, they're part of under Mass General Law.
They just,
The issue is we've never labeled them
Labeled.
so that
That's
anybody
right.
knows them. I mean,
Right.
that's the action item.
and it's just a label, nothing more.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But the
James,
sign,
three,
it's
four,
a-
six.
There was also, but there was also a strategy in here to update old and outdated inventory sheets of property areas, objects in the Massachusetts Historical
Well,
Inventory.
Historic
Have we
Commission,
done that?
oh yeah,
So we have that.
that's constantly being
Well,
revised.
Yeah, we-
Historical Commission has, it. Historical Society
Well,
doesn't have it. It's another story. But just to say that, the legislature has gotten all these things for scenic road designations and improvements and fines for what you can't do in terms of tree cutting along a designated scenic road. We just haven't made that a bylaw, and we haven't done anything to
Right.
promote it.
And I
It's-
guess my
it's-
question is, if the Historical Society has done that, does the planning board, does the zoning board all have that same information? I guess,
Well, it's identified here in the
yeah,
master
but I
plan.
mean, do they have that updated inventory
No.
on which to make some decisions?
Well, yeah, are you referring to the scenic roads or to the
I'm just
mattress?
looking at this one strategy that it just says under historic and cultural. It just talks about properties, areas, objects, structures on Massachusetts historical inventory, that's all. All I'm saying is,
But isn't that more artifact stuff? What is that? Different, or houses, or,
It's houses.
Houses.
The structures.
yeah.
okay.
And if you're asking if they have copies of the Macris inventory, I would say no, but it's all online.
Okay. I guess because we talked, when we started this whole conversation way back at the beginning, it's this intersection of all of these different, an overlap of all of these different committees
Right.
who have jurisdiction, but there's no necessarily coordination, communication, I guess I would say.
That Macris list, it only identifies structures that are 100 years old
Okay.
or are on the,
Okay. I'm just, maybe that was a poor example, but I'm thinking about prioritizing properties that the town might want to acquire,
Well,
understanding
this
which
is
ones are in
buildings that are
chapter,
yeah, that's not referring to open lands.
No.
The inventory is buildings.
Okay, all right.
And I think, my guess is that the inventory, the municipal preservation plan is structural preservation, architectural preservation being referred to in that, rather than land preservation.
I would think so, yeah.
Okay.
And we don't have any municipal preservation plan whatsoever.
Okay. We will, I don't know, I'm gonna circle back on that. So, Chapter 4, Open Space, Natural Resources, protect Southampton's water resources, identify and preserve important parcels for ecological, recreation, cultural, and historic value, create a townwide green network. See, that's why I feel like scenic roads and views should be in this chapter. So I highlighted 4-2A because we had talked about it in Chapter 3, but the prioritized list.
That's, absolutely, that's top.
I would request that you get rid of the words consider on 5C and D.
Yep.
Were they just
So just
talking the,
develop a larger, yeah.
Yeah, just make,
Concom, wasn't the buffer we were talking about tonight 25 feet instead of 100 feet?
It was,
That was the buffer zone, not a wetland.
yeah.
There was a bylaw that tried to almost get into,
The conservation zone, 25-foot wide strip of undisturbed vegetation within a buffer zone. They would call it the conservation zone, and it would be maintained adjacent to any resource area. So
Was
no
that
work
the first-
structures or alterations would be allowed unless permitted.
The first 25 feet of the 100, essentially?
It just says 25-foot wide strip adjacent to a resource area
So
in the
it's
buffer zone. I'm not sure, 100 feet or 50.
Okay. Didn't that went before town meeting, I think?
well, that was, it got killed apparently. It never,
Yeah.
it got tabled. It never got to vote.
Yeah, because it wasn't, because of the question of where is the 25 feet, right? Because it was, because even me, thinking, because I live next to a stream, right? And are you telling me outside of that 100 foot, there's another 25 feet where I can't mow my lawn or trim the hedges, right? Like, that's what comes up from as a resident standpoint.
Yeah.
That's why I was curious if you had more information on it. because-
No, it doesn't specify.
So 4.5B, low impact development. Larry had a lot to say about that. And he basically says this contradicts the concept of healthy communities. Because, let's see here, I don't want to read all these pages, but in June, Pioneer Valley Planning Commission finished developing what they called the Model Subdivision Regulations. And it was composed of municipal planners from 6 or 7 different communities: South Hadley, Ludlow, Belchertown, Agawam, Easthampton, and Ware. And collectively, they had over 100 years of direct municipal experience, overlooking 100 subdivisions. And they voted 11-1 not to promote low-impact development. And the reasons were as follows. Implementations of the recommended low-impact developments elements would negate pretty much the important elements of what we call the complete streets and the healthy communities. It reduces the right-of-way to 30 feet and roadway pavement width as to narrow as 18 feet. Now, this is where they kind of lost me, because this is all the stats on, probably some of you understand this a little bit more. And he says that the low-income development, you notice those are capitalized, that's like a concept, low-impact development. It's contradictory to this whole idea of healthy communities and complete streets. There were safety concerns relative to the adequate access for emergency vehicles, as well as adequately accommodating associated building requirements for public utilities within the right-of-way. It reduces or eliminates sidewalks. We want to encourage sidewalks, right? We want more ability to use sidewalks if we were to do this low-impact development. And it doesn't encourage the use of safe pedestrian environments. And we want to see more use of pedestrian and bicycle pathways, but the low-impact development is contradictory to that. That's basically the bottom line. So they sort of said, don't encourage it.
But
Sort of
isn't
very strongly
the
said.
way that's worded up there, though, isn't that narrowly focused on the stormwater management part?
It is, and I was actually just reading that wondering, what are the lid standards for basically stormwater runoff? Stormwater management, right?
So what I'm getting by your feedback, Cindy, is it's about reducing the square footage of blacktop,
Yeah,
right? So you have narrower roads,
18
less
feet,
sidewalks,
less impervious.
That's LID.
or, right, you have stone ground sidewalks, whatever, so it's, and so they're discouraging it because the narrower streets makes it harder for emergency vehicles to navigate, or is that one of the things they were to say?
There's one thing you said.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so it reduces the town's right-of-way.
Yeah.
It reduces the ability for emergency vehicles to travel well, I guess.
Reduces the number of sidewalks and reduces the ability for safe bike paths.
I think in the case of like a sidewalk, if it's sidewalks, whatever, it's not blacktop. So you accomplished both the sidewalk and the limiting the stormwater runoff. Of course, I'm guessing the maintenance for a crushed stone walk is more than for the sidewalk. Because when you shovel it or plow it, you make a mess, and weeds come up, and,
They did mention utilizing pervious pavements and sidewalks in some sections of roadway with lower traffic volumes. They said the working group found this to be an interesting idea, but they also found that it would require increased maintenance time and expense, as well as capital expenditures, such as buying a sidewalk vacuum, to maintain the integrity and functionality of the pervious pavements. Porosity.
You probably have to take the fines and the sediment out of the actual stone.
So what I mean, it's quite lengthy here, is discussion on this. What the takeaway was that the the impact development standards theoretically are a good idea, but in reality and practicality and expense, they haven't proven to be as good.
So
yeah, I guess
we're not gonna, if you were to redo a road completely today, we would not utilize any low-impact development standards, right?
That's the way it sounds, yeah.
If you did it today, you wouldn't use that.
Yeah.
So, on the same token, if we were to municipally maintain some roads on sort of the outskirt areas of town, you're going to use a grader, you're going to use, crushed stone and things to fix the road and pave the road. So you're not gonna put a 30-foot road, double lane road with sidewalks everywhere in town. So you're gonna utilize low-impact development in some areas without even implementing low-impact development. They're not gonna make sense on Route 10 or East Street or any of these other streets. So, are we okay just striking this one?
or just saying it needs more study, because it's,
I think strike. I think the takeaway I got, that this was all written a number of years ago, and that when it started to be implemented in various places, it didn't prove to be as good a plan as they...
Okay.
That was my sense
Right.
from this.
I think it depends on what you're measuring, you know. Certainly environmentally,
Yeah.
I'm sure it was successful, but it sounds very expensive,
Yeah,
and there's consequences that people didn't anticipate.
right.
Would you want to say something like review the viability of low-impact development, just to leave it
Or,
halfway open?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we have enough information or knowledge to strike it.
Well, we're talking about prioritizing here.
right,
We're not eliminating it from the master plan.
Oh, I thought
That's
what
right.
that, right.
We're
The word
moving it
strike
from
would
the
be okay.
prioritization.
yeah.
So like, I think what we report out on this are the things that we want to move forward with immediately, if
Exactly.
possible.
Yes.
So like you said, it doesn't necessarily mean it goes away, but
Yes.
it may be something that requires further
Yes.
review and development.
Yes, clearly.
I think in terms of all the stuff that's up there for us to work on, that's my sense, that this may not be the one we want to put our greatest energies into.
I'm looking at this, and this is still a lot. I know this was a lot. This is still a lot.
Still alive, yeah.
Well, the MAPAC thing has gone away, right? So that,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
there's
gone.
nothing we can do anything about.
Should we do something about it though? When I was looking at it earlier, it's gone away, but should somebody be
I think
the,
it's-
should we be the
Yeah.
champion of that, right? Like, it went away, but
I
maybe
agree.
we have to, or whoever was in that group needs to make the call, like, hey, we need to do something. If not at a regional level, do it from a local level.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I agree.
I kind of left it on there as a conversation piece.
Yeah.
Can we change the verbs from actively participate to reactivate?
Something like that.
I know that the mayor of Easthampton called the group
Revive.
together a year ago in July, trying to get something going again. And and I was new to the group. Other people would participate years and years and years, like, people from our water commission and so forth. And everybody just kind of like
I think it should,
wanted to walk
I
away
think
from
we
it.
should put that as,
So I had no perspective on it. I just kind of went with whatever they were saying. But it's an issue for us. Concern.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Well, before we leave that last one, 42C,
Committee update, yep.
that seems to be
That's
pretty,
in process.
So that was a reminder, because that's something that
We
is
missed
worked
the date,
on,
but-
okay.
and this is just kind of a, keep working on it.
Okay, so
'Cause I
we don't have to emphasize, in other words, they're
No,
on
it's-
it.
it's happening.
No.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't want to lose state or federal grants,
Well, yeah,
right?
it's
Someone's going to throw money at you, you want to
expired,
throw money.
but we haven't actively requested any more state and federal grants since it's expired. But we got to get going on that, and we, hopefully within the next, 4 or 5 months it'll be done.
But it's someone from PVPC.
Yeah, so we've got this woman, Emily Slotnick, who's working with us on that.
I actually have to duck out.
I do too.
You gotta get going? It's getting late. So can I just tell you about 5.2, complete streets? So we have a member of the planning board named Paul Fergal, who actually, I think is the chair of the Greenway Committee right now.
Yes,
told
he
me
is.
He is.
Yeah.
He spent a long time, his professional background, he's an engineer, right? He's a civil engineer. You guys gotta go. Good night. See ya. He told me, told us.
Wait, are people going to come? It's a joint meeting on the 26th, next Tuesday, between the select board and this committee, so.
It's gonna be posted.
I will post it.
And I won't be able to be there, yeah. Okay. Talk to you guys later.
All right.
Paul Fergal, in no uncertain terms, said we do not want a complete streets project in our town. He went on to tell me, theoretically, it was considered a good program, but there's, oh my gosh, he was going on and on and on about this, and I'm trying to take notes. It requires a town vote, it has to be, you have to prioritize the streets, there's a lot of funding issues, different levels of use, super big job. He basically said it's not a good idea for a lot of reasons. He says things have been,
Sounds like if we have a super committee, he should be somebody who's on it.
he's a quiet guy, and he's on our,
No, I know,
Yeah.
I'm just
but
saying.
my takeaway from his long discussion of this was that this is another one that we probably don't want to put a lot of activity into right now, because it's comprehensive, that a lot of the towns that got into this wish they hadn't, and the ones that they're really not encouraging it right now.
Why? Because with it comes a lot of requirements or restrictions? or-
Regulations.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at it, it's talking about people with different
Yeah.
abilities,
Yeah.
different forms of transportation and mobility.
Seems like a more urban focus than
I-
rural. Or is that?
Yep. There's multiple tiers to activate it. Tier 1 is you have to get a town vote. Tier 2 is you have to prioritize your plan. Tier 3 is you have to get the DOT funding and to put it into place. So you can see what's going on here.
Or tier 1. Whatever that means.
We need a town vote. We haven't done the town vote.
Right next door in Eastham, they have approved projects. So if you click on it, does it tell you what they are?
Yeah, I think Cottage Street was complete street, what they just did. I think it was. Corner of Clark and College, Cottage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have a different set of problems. The growth that's going on is just tremendous.
Okay. So, explore Complete Streets program. I mean, I know Paul, but I think
How
for
about
something like this,
evaluate Complete Streets as it would benefit us?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to determine the benefits to Southampton.
Because I know, I mean, I know Paul personally and professionally, so his business is designing civil roadway projects, so if he's saying this is not the best avenue, then I think it's worth kind of evaluating and talking to him, and just before we nix it, to just have another conversation, right? 'Cause
Sure, sure.
I mean, realistically, he makes a living off of designing these projects, so if he says it's not a good idea, there's probably some value to that, right? Because if
Yeah.
you wouldn't shoot yourself in the foot with
Yeah.
future work.
Yeah.
Well,
I like the way you stated, what are you thinking?
well, I'm thinking, is Paul saying don't do it analogous to a developer saying don't limit the building lot sizes?
I don't think so, but
I think he's careful to recuse himself from projects that he specifically has reason to be involved in.
I don't know the man. I'm just saying that his advice seems very broad.
It's experiential advice, I think. That's-
Yeah.
He's basically telling us, that's what my takeaway was, he was telling us the major
benefit of other towns'
issues, the major
experiences.
issues that other towns who have started to work on these have encountered.
I mean, I would
I think
say,
he's important to hear him, but I mean, there's a lot of towns who've adopted this, and
And regret it. That was what,
that's the unknown.
Yeah.
That's an N of one saying that.
you probably
So-
talk to us about it if you want to, or you
well, like, so the Complete Streets does include sidewalks and bike lanes. I do know that specifically, right? So that is a large hurdle for towns, just from an acceptance standpoint, because one, you take your entire town right away, along with whatever frontage a homeowner may think is there, so that creates an issue.
Trees and-
I know from what I do professionally, where we have to relocate overhead facilities because of that is a giant pain, because you basically, so we set poles in your lawn, right, in the town taking, we usually set them behind the sidewalk. Well, when you
just did it-
expand the whole
just did it
road,
on Glendale.
right, when you expand the whole road and you put in bike paths and
Sidewalks.
on either side, you either force us out of the right of way, or we end up having to put a pole in the sidewalk or in some place where it doesn't necessarily fit the best. So I know towns have had issues with this just from on some of our meetings, because the state wants to force you to put sidewalks on both sides of the street. There are some places like Worthington where they have a project where, no, we don't need two sidewalks on both sides of the street. And the state comes back with, but that's the program, right? So I think you need a special waiver not to meet all the design guidelines, so. I don't know.
Right. It's just worth exploring more.
I guess in the whole scheme of things, in terms of the priorities, since we have so many things, is this one of them that we want to include at this time? I guess, coming down to it.
I think the way he's written it, I'm comfortable with evaluate Complete Street to determine the benefits for Southampton. You might phrase it in a little bit differently, to determine the cost benefit for Southampton.
Well, it's cost and otherwise, I mean,
Okay,
what it does to people's
Cost and
property,
opportunity.
things
Cost-
like, you know.
okay.
I think that's what you mean by a cost benefit.
Yeah, cost benefit analysis kind of thing, yeah.
I mean, out of that bunch, isn't the biggest priority the 3B?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's the one that I think.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, I think 2B and 2C
And
can be summed up with make sure we're designing for sidewalks, right? I mean, I think that's what it comes down to, is make sure that we don't just have sidewalks a half a mile from the school. We actually design going outward on future road projects.
Sidewalk connectivity.
Yeah, basically connect them all and make sure you, whether it's through Complete Streets or some other program, make sure you're putting in a sidewalk when you're redoing a road. So you don't have sidewalks to nowhere. Like if you drive around, Mass DOT standard for a bridge replacement is sidewalks on both sides. There are bridges with sidewalks to nowhere all across the state because there's actually no sidewalks leading to those bridges. So.
And the older bridges just have one sidewalk, so that
Yeah.
must be the older interpretation. Yeah. Set up for the future.
And then 4A as well.
I think 4A is
When people will
important.
be using this together.
The expanded transit service, yeah. Somehow.
Yeah.
I mean, those two seem to be the biggest.
Sidewalks, greenway, and expanded transit service. Right, so
So
how do
you're
we get people
highlighting
moving in
the
town?
top ones.
Both recreationally and for
Okay.
specific need. I'm sorry, say that again?
I was just asking, you're highlighting the top things.
Yes,
The ones
These
that-
two?
three.
All the way along the line. When you've
51,
been highlighting.
52, and 53. Or are you talking about,
I just asked a question. When he puts.
Oh, these?
When he puts the yellow on all of these, those are meant to be the top things we're recommending.
Emphasis, usually
Yeah, I see.
emphasis,
Okay.
yeah. Like, because when I review this, I know 52B and 52C are kind of combined from a report out function. You know, how do we look to expand the sidewalk system? And how do we incorporate complete streets into that with a cost benefit analysis, right? Do we need sidewalks on both sides? Do we,
But in terms of the action items, your focus is on the yellow ones. I mean,
the
that's what
yellow,
you're gonna
yeah.
present.
That's where the emphasis is, right?
Yeah.
Like, because some of these too, the sidewalk plans, if there's municipal or DOT construction plans, for instance, there's a site meeting for East Street Bridge this week. They're gonna put a sidewalk on the bridge. The town doesn't need to ask for it, it's gonna get one. We just wanna probably make sure it's on the right side for any future sidewalk.
It's not gonna be on both?
Who knows?
Don't think so. I think it was only one.
Chapter 6, Public Services and Facilities. So I had protect water supply, establish land use development policies to respond to infrastructure capacity, and support Southampton's public elementary school facilities and programming to assist with ongoing student achievement. So I think this one is going to rely on some definite input from the Water Commission. You know, how do we do this? How do we get this out to the residents? It is its own breakout exercise with them moving these forward, and then the school choice revenue. We've lived that for a little while. I can definitely speak on that, and the select board understands the need of that. So,
How is that one in this?
What's the title of that?
because we didn't want to leave it out.
Oh, okay. So it's
Chapter
order
6,
of-
Public Services and Facilities. So education, so when we reviewed it, water was important, but it was agreed that education should not be left out from a reportable priority. It's something that is being worked, but once again, I think it comes down to a consistent reminder that this is a priority. We need to make sure we're looking at it and doing what's possible.
Now, the other one, what Janet was talking about, we left it out of here, one of the other ones was increase public services available through the Council on Aging and Senior Center to meet future needs of elder populations.
So chapter 6.
That's chapter 6 also.
yeah, I think, as I mentioned, I think
there
I was the only
was
one who
a-
voted for it.
I mean, the only thing that we've kind of talked about in general was on affordable housing, whereas the whole notion of having a senior center and having
They provided more and better services.
activities and services
Yeah.
to help, or to, whatever, to respond to the needs of the increasingly aging population. Somehow, I think we didn't end up making that a priority. I would like to suggest that be on there somewhere, though. And it was,
Aren't we also, and I'll ask Francine, aren't we also potentially losing out on some funding because we're not providing some of the services to the aging? Didn't I understand that? And we don't have hot meals every day?
We don't have really terrific transportation to get people
Yeah.
where they need to go. I think there are lots of enhancements that could
when the
happen.
services in the master plan were kind of wishy-washy, you know, it's increasing the number of staff for full-time director, okay, that's been done, right? Connect the new senior center to any,
No, not.
Pushing
it's
out
like
full-time?
20
well,
Whatever 26 hours a week is.
okay, adding, this as a full-time director and
Yeah.
increase the number of hours for the part-time assistant. Connect the new senior center to any future wastewater system in town to include or allow for the access to an increased meals program.
No, the reason they can't do it now is
Right.
because the septic system that they designed for this building is not adequate
Right.
for them to use the kitchen. So they built this kitchen with 2 stoves, ovens, the whole thing, can't use it.
So transportation, meals, but,
It's ready
you
for
know,
money.
space as well. I mean, I think the notion of a new senior center, you know, ought to be.
Yeah, that would be, I know that I voted for it, and I know that when we were calling out our
Yeah.
numbers here.
But I think this is the only time we've got to
One of the only
present
ones
it. I
who
mean,
did it.
I know, that to me is more realistic than whatever this looping Pequot Pond to Valley Road and it's a more
Yeah.
urgent need to me anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree. We tried to be very democratic about the scoring of how things got to be prioritized here. But
But it's the only place it comes up
Right.
is in this chapter. It doesn't really,
Well, and in housing, I mean.
I was just
there's
gonna
an
actually
overlay.
write housing.
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
okay, good.
Okay.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I just want to confirm, do we have a quorum here? Do we have sufficient numbers?
2, 3, 4,
Well, we only have 5 now, and
6,
we're
7,
9 altogether.
8,
9.
9. Yeah.
Yeah, we made it.
Good. Just made it.
And we need at least 5 to show up on Tuesday.
Chapter 7, energy, promote energy efficiency in all buildings and infrastructure, promote renewable energy. So, PV on the landfill, is it possible? Methane capture from the landfill, is it possible? Promote energy efficiency in all buildings and infrastructure, so that was kind of an overarching goal, but, you know, are we doing that? Are we pushing for that? Monitor and evaluate progress and savings of town energy efficiency measures. So that to me is pretty important. And it's one of those things that it's been going on for years. What are we doing, right? And improve the efficiency of municipal streetlights.
So, 7-1, energy efficiency in all buildings. I mean, that's something that could be accomplished through building code requirements. So I know some towns in their building codes have a stretch goal where you know, basically the house, you build a house, it almost has to be like a sealed envelope, which creates its own problem because then you have trapped moisture and everything. But nonetheless, these are stretch goals as far as energy efficiency. And some towns don't.
We adopted this, right?
We have.
We do? Okay.
It's part of the requirement for a green community.
It is? Okay.
Adoption of the stretch goal. So I think this is a pretty overarching one, right? You take care of the newer construction aspect just through the code and implementation of the code. I think I look at this and see a little more, what are we doing to reduce our electric bill, right? As a town, what are we doing to our buildings?
For heat,
Yeah.
Streetlights.
yeah, I mean, I don't have a sense of what our status is now. I mean, if we were supposed to grade, if we were to evaluate, what grade would we get as a town?
Yeah.
And what should we set as our goal?
Wasn't something through one of the grants or something that we were supposed to reduce it by
20%.
20%?
Right.
Supposed to
I
have a plan
think-
to reduce by 20. So you develop your baseline and then you have a plan to
Right.
reduce
20% over 5 or 10 years,
So
something
we've
like
done
that.
some of that, I guess.
But I mean,
it's-
buildings like the school and the library, these other than
Sure.
town hall buildings,
Yeah.
are in such disrepair. And they're, you know, they're leaking air, water's dripping in. I mean, there are all kinds of problems that we're not addressing. So I mean, collectively, what are we talking about and what should we be putting together as a plan?
So is it reduce energy costs in existing municipal buildings, or what do we say? Rather than just promote efficiency, because theoretically
Yeah,
we're doing that, right? But,
Well, it improves the, you know, the integrity,
Costs.
I guess, to, you know, because if you have, you'll save money ultimately.
you know, we've changed light bulbs, right? So, in some places, so, okay, that's a start, but I mean,
Is this something that's measurable, you know, so
That's
baseline?
By the electric.
That's what I'm asking.
Right, so if we reduce it by 20%, or should we?
Well, that's what it's based off of, is your actual bill. So they have programs where it imports your bills and then tracks it and tracks your kilowatt hours used. So it's basically how you're going to determine whether or not you,
But that doesn't tell us what we need to do for efficiency in order to reduce that, and that's, I guess that's what I'm saying we
the
should.
town is a designated green community. There's a plan written somewhere which tells you, you're required to write a plan. I wrote that for a town I worked for before. It's supposed to be written down somewhere to be designated, so
Yeah,
it's.
but I mean, writing it and doing it.
No, I know, but
Just saying,
the
there's-
steps, they've got to be written somewhere, so Ed might have them, maybe Bob's got them.
No, I'm sure, I'm sure they do, because I know we got that designation.
He's gone.
I know.
Yeah.
But he hired the Amherst engineer that was supposed
I
to.
think that Ed has talked about this,
He
though.
has.
he's talked
Yeah.
about it, but
I know we got energy credits we bought into
From,
something in Deerfield, some
Hatfield.
solar field or
Hatfield.
something.
no, it's the biogas thing in Hatfield.
Yeah.
Which is good, but I mean, you know,
So what do we want to
Maybe
say up
little
here?
steps.
What are we trying to say?
I guess that I see we did that. I don't know where we're going with that to enhance it, to make it better. Are we gonna put in a solar field? Are we gonna do something else here? Are we just gonna,
Or are you going to buy into conservation? Are you going to insulate? Are you going to change bulbs? That's what you're
Yeah.
looking for. What are the
I wanna see what we're
specifics?
gonna do to improve.
I
I'm
think
sure
that's,
the
I think
plan
that's
is there,
strictly.
but we need to hear what's going
I
on.
was gonna say, that's just a dissemination of information that's already, that is somewhere in the building, right? So you need to know what all that information says first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then figure out, you need to status and track, and then see what you need to do
I'm
next.
still trying to figure out why we put a new secondary entrance door. We replaced one. And we had to get a building permit, and the guy had to come and inspect it. It's just a door
Where is this?
at our house.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's on our garage. It's a back door to the garage.
You can move to Vermont, you won't have to worry about it.
So I guess my question is, when I'm looking, are they looking at it from the energy perspective? Why was he, you know, and not that
So if it's a
his
glazed,
concern.
if it's a glazed door, then yeah, they should be looking at the SEER rating on the
So
window
that's
and
why.
stuff. But also to make sure it's installed properly and it works and it's watertight.
So that, okay.
so what do we want to say in terms of proposing this, in terms of very concrete things? Do we want a photovoltaic installation on our landfill, solar photovoltaic? Do we know if that's feasible?
Right, the way that's worded is do it, as opposed to the one
Yeah.
below it, explore. We don't know if it's profitable, but
well, or maybe not on landfill, but somewhere in town. I mean, maybe is that what your point was, Francine? I mean, you've talked about behind the fire station, right?
Yeah, and then they might
The
use it
land
for
that we own,
anything else,
the
yeah.
land that we own. And so is that the idea that, you know, maybe,
So you want to just get rid of landfill and put town parcels?
Installation on,
explore solar voltaic installation
Installations.
on town-owned land
On
or
town
something?
property.
Town property.
Or, yeah.
yeah. Or you could say property, because you could install them on top of a building.
Yep.
Some would argue would be more environmentally friendly than just taking the plant.
8.
Drum roll.
Promote land use development patterns that protect the town's natural resources and rural character. Cluster zoning regulations. Insert adopted regulations for agricultural preservation. Consider revising minimum lot size requirements. Consider revising and updating the town's existing sign bylaw. I don't know if that's a priority, but.
No, I don't think so. You want to take that one out?
We're
Yeah,
not taking anything out, right? Or
All
we're
right.
just,
We're just highlighting, right?
yeah, I may not bring that one up.
Yeah, that's,
To be honest.
Existing sign.
There are
By the end of the night,
that's
that's not your big finish, really? It could be. You gotta finish strong, Mike. That's,
Did the representative have anything to say?
Yep.
What'd he say?
Recommend deleting it.
The whole thing?
Yep.
Chapter 8?
No, the
Oh.
cluster zoning.
Update existing cluster zoning
Yeah.
regulations to make the regulations more user-friendly.
Yeah.
So eliminating the minimum tract size.
2A, well, 2A, we're currently doing this in terms of the review of the zoning bylaws. So 2A is being done.
Okay.
It's under development. You can go ahead and keep 2A. On 2B, that's the one, insert adopted regulations for agricultural preservation districts into the zoning bylaw. And revise regulations, blah, 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 blah. This is the one he said, delete it. Don't.
2B?
Yeah, he said, don't put your emphasis on this.
That's the one that Barbara researched for us, right?
Well, we had this one, remember I talked to you about that before, Barbara?
Yeah.
Lots of stuff came out of that.
I mean, there was a lot of, Barbara did do a lot of work.
Yeah, she
For
did.
little,
There was only 2 pieces.
I think we learned
Two
a lot,
parcels,
but
yeah.
it's just sort of little gain when it comes to the square footage of town.
It was little gain in that regard. It was a big gain in terms of the fact that that's what happens in our town. Things
Yeah.
get passed, they don't get inserted, they get ignored, they get forgotten, people die, and that's what happens. So as far as putting this as a priority, I would have to recommend we kind of delete this one off our presentation, what do you call it, your readout or
My
your
report. I'm
report.
okay with that, just knowing the history and what Barbara talked about, but I think from a,
And Lucy never did Lucy ever add that in?
Well, she said she was going
Yeah,
to.
Francine, we have to check on that.
about whether, yeah,
Does that ever got?
Well, it wouldn't be in the general bylaws, it would be in the zoning bylaws. You're working with her on the general bylaws.
Oh, that's true, that's true.
Yeah,
that little
Never
note on the
made-
bottom
never
is
made
just
the
for me
zoning,
as a,
okay,
it was brought
talk
to their
about.
attention because I went to the meeting and reminded them of it.
good, yeah.
I don't know whether or not they've done it.
Yeah. Are 2A and 2C contradictory, or are they the same thing? Is that what it means to eliminate the minimum tract, so we're actually increasing it?
Minimum tract size requirement. And that
So
says
he asked
consider
why we're
revising.
doing this,
why we're doing 2C.
why we're changing the minimum lot size in rural residential
I thought we wanted
to
more,
larger.
it seems counterintuitive, don't we want smaller,
That's exactly his point, yeah.
smaller
You're
lots
right,
so we can have more
yes, they
residential?
are.
Yeah,
You're right, Chris.
So I think there's a balance though, right, when you talk about the development of areas versus how you develop it, right? So just because you have a smaller lot size doesn't mean you build a nice cluster development. It just may mean you line the street with more houses.
right, I think that's what this is getting at. There's rural parts of town where you don't want necessarily a bunch of even smaller houses. You want them in an area where there's other small houses. It would be hard for me to imagine a neighborhood like Mountain View Circle out on Crooked Ledge.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's what this is getting at. So yes, we want smaller sizes, but I don't see it as contradictory, because this town really, there's different parts of town.
So focused development and regulation in focused areas.
Yeah. Where it fits.
Yeah.
Where just the everyday Jean and Joe walking down the street is going to say, this looks right here, versus it looks funky here.
I think we should put attention on A2C. I think for land use, we should stick with A2A, and that's where we want to be.
You sure you don't want to talk about the signage?
Well,
Yeah, I
like
don't
signs
see,
too.
right, I don't see a lot of benefit from focusing on 2C, because I just don't think that anyone's
That's-
going
yeah.
to put anything.
I
Yeah.
agree with you on that.
Well, because I think too, if you're at that acreage point, I don't think you're in an area where there's an issue. If you're 60,000 square feet, I don't think, I don't quite get it, I don't quite get where the emphasis is, because you have that much square footage today, more than likely, you probably have a little more square footage, because you're not in a development area. You know, there may be some pockets, or residential pockets, where the lots are smaller, but if you're almost at 2 acres, you're probably, you're probably not, I don't quite get it. I don't
Here's
know.
how he
If you're in that
phrased it.
area, then then a 2-acre house, like a house going on a 2-acre lot is fine, depending on where you live.
He said,
Right.
I will point out that by retaining the existing frontage requirements, you will not really notice any decrease in density.
Right.
So that's essentially what you're saying. You're not
Yeah.
really going to see a whole lot of difference by changing.
No,
the
because you still
number
didn't,
of school.
Right.
you just allowed, the frontage doesn't change, so you
Yeah.
just get deeper lots.
That's right.
Right.
Which,
Right, it just, it's someone I think had good intent there.
Yeah.
To keep it, try to appear rural. But being rural is going to make it stay rural
Yeah.
by its own
Yeah.
nature.
Well, I guess I was just thinking, like, the 3 lots that the Fishers are turning out now, those are like 1.3, 1.4 acres.
Right.
That are getting pulled out of chapter for sale.
Right.
There's 3 lots. Each of them is, not even 2 acres. So I was just trying to,
where is that?
Crooked Ledge.
It's on the corner of Crooked Ledge and Russellville? Fulham.
Fulmar.
And yeah.
No, not Fulham, the other side, isn't it? Fulham?
1.5 acres is 65,000 and change square feet.
Yeah.
Right.
What
You're not
backs up
talking about lots.
those lots? Woodlands? So it doesn't really matter that they're 1.34 or 1.68 or whatever they are acres, because they're going to back up against woodlands anyway. They're going to look deep, even if they don't own the land.
I think whoever had that intent there, you need much more than 2 acres to really make an impact.
Yeah, I was just trying to
So
understand.
again, I think that one should not bring,
Much
I think we were, at that point in Chapter 8, we were all trying to just think of our 3 priorities, and that one
Right.
ended up.
Yeah.
So,
So can you just flip through just to see where all our yellows are? Just from the beginning, just curiosity. Where did we go?
So chapter
go to the yellows
1, we didn't get into the yellowing yet. So this one was kind of like an entire
148.
Yeah.
report out.
Yeah.
To be honest, everything, like, obviously this is our first one, but there isn't really a lot here that I think, well, we should not.
Yeah.
And I think this one, because housing was such a hot topic, this one should be talked about, and we should, hit each item.
The 4F, where it is, continue to seek funds, have we done that? 4F?
No.
I mean, that might be one
Yeah.
out of anything. No? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have
Do we have a?
do we even qualify for CDBG funds? I want to say we looked that up and we may not.
I'm not sure.
Because
Because that's what my memory tells me. I don't
the
know.
size of the
It
population.
could have been. It could have been population driven.
I mean, I think, those, all the others are certainly very,
Yeah, very
very much
important.
prioritizing.
So you're gonna
them.
highlight all of
I
those?
think I
Yeah, I mean, I
Just
think
know that they're, yeah, you don't need. to
housing needs a
highlight it.
plan, right? Just overall, there needs to be a plan, implementation of bylaws, but also a plan going forward, sort of a,
Well, and.
how do we address this?
Yeah, and CPC, under 4E, CPC's been talking about, how could we, use CPC money to help out with this? I mean, good Lord, they've got like $400,000 sitting there that hasn't been used.
That much?
Yeah, I think
They do.
they said something like that, yeah.
It's crazy.
So,
Chapter 2.
Just one other thing, since we've had that other, we did the small sewer thing, but we had that other presentation on fiber optic. Do we want to, I know you've got telecommunications up there, but I'm wondering if we want to say anything more about that?
with something a little more specific.
Easthampton's moving with their municipal light
Yeah.
plan now apparently, and all these other towns. I mean, is that something we want to also encourage? I mean, it's kind of,
And my understanding is that we have, as a resident in this town, someone who's, who else is doing it, Hadley or South Hadley? Anyway, he's the person responsible for doing it in that town.
And
He lives in Southampton, and we've not tapped him.
Who is he?
I have his phone number. His last name is Fitzgerald. But, it came up, we had the presentation, they gave us the price tag of 4.4 million to do it, and it kind of died
then it'll go
there.
off the vine again. So,
I mean,
we did actively pursue alternative wastewater treatment, so we've got that one.
that was,
Opens
yes,
that door a little
yes.
bit. So I was just wondering if we wanted to, I don't know.
I think a number of people are raising the issue around
People are sick of charter for sure.
Yes, they are. Internet access, all of that.
Yeah.
They're really very disgusted with that, a number of people, and that would be a good direction.
Yeah, I think we need to look at that.
It's just, someone raised the issue after that presentation, well, this technology is only going to be good for 10 years, 5-10 years, and then they're going to come in with something else and then something else. But in the meantime, we're supposed to do nothing?
Right.
And it might be a building
Developing-
block to the next generation of things, I don't know. that.
Developing satellite links that
Yes,
will allow,
yes.
you don't need the bandwidth and
Right.
all that, and so, of course, then
I don't
there's
know what the
people
answer
worried
is.
about light
Yes.
pollution and all these satellites floating out there, so,
I don't know what the answer is.
anyway, yeah.
Well, I like the way it's stated, pursue
Yes.
alternative telecommunication options.
I think we'd be remiss if we didn't include that. Great.
That's good.
9 o'clock, yeah.
4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
5.
5 is Greenway, PVC, yes.
Yeah.
Those are good.
Yeah.
6.
It's a little weak.
You had 8A on there too, didn't you?
8A?
Yeah.
Yes. So
Yes.
I looked at this one from water, education, aging population, in terms of how I'll kind of frame the conversation.
Okay. Okay, but you only highlighted the,
Yeah, I intended to talk about all of them on this one a little bit. Not necessarily every water item, but stressing the need for some statuses from the water department.
yeah. Do we want to limit the water one to just the ponds area?
I gotta be honest, I don't feel like the Water Commission pursues this stuff kind of on a daily, yearly basis, right? Like they have a master plan, they have improvement plans. I think it's great that PVPC put some of these suggestions in here, but
Okay.
I just think the commission's,
they're doing it. What are they doing? What do they see as the new steps forward? I mean, these are good things to have here, and I'm sure the statuses are gonna be, yeah, it's on our 10-year plan.
Yeah, because they've gotten a couple of grants for, pumping station and something else, and
Okay.
something else.
So is it maybe then to support the Water
A good idea,
Commission's implementation of their master plan? Or something? Not that I've ever read their master plan.
No, that's a good idea, because that's really in their court, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Something like that. Lisa
Energy,
mentions it.
we just went over.
What did we highlight? We didn't highlight anything?
No, I was gonna kind of talk about,
He's gonna talk about most of them.
yeah,
That's why,
Yeah.
just like chapter 1,
Mhm.
Okay,
and then land use, we just did.
okay.
All right.
All right, yeah, that gets us somewhere.
So when do we, well, the next meeting is,
Tuesday.
The select board.
26.
and I'm
What
not
time is that?
available.
Yeah.
It starts at 6, so I guess, we haven't gotten the agenda yet, but I'm assuming it would be early on the agenda.
So,
45 minutes.
Okay.
I think the other, Mike, you said you were gonna put the responsible commissions or committees on there. I think that's important, because I
Yeah,
can,
there'll be some handout, kind of going over what we're talking
That's how
about.
they did it here.
I know, but not to go
Right.
crazy with it, but I mean, I know Concom and others are gonna say, so what are we supposed to do? If there's nothing that says that this is their domain, people are just gonna,
Right.
do nothing. I think so.
I'd really like to see a panel of experts in each of these areas, and I think in our town, we do have people with that type of expertise who could really drive this, or advise us.
So the next meeting is the 26th. Do we want to schedule the one after that?
Yeah, I guess we should.
Sure.
December 9th?
Or do you want to go to that first week in December? You want to go 2 weeks?
I'm okay.
I'm okay either way.
I
Okay,
mean, we may have a lot to digest after the meeting.
all right. So December 9th, is that fine, people?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
December 9th.
7 o'clock.
It's okay.
That's weird.
So I should write this down. So the other one is November what?
26th.
26. With select board.
You could call in.
I could, couldn't I? I offered to call in on the other one, you saw that.
So the 9th, we're sticking to 7 o'clock start time, correct?
Yeah, it's just the select board one that's different. That's okay.
Okay, the Public Safety Building Committee is going to be meeting at 4:30 that day, on the 26th.
What else did you say was on the December 4th?
With that, I
Planning
will
board.
entertain a motion
That's
to
the
adjourn.
public hearing.
Actually, before we adjourn, just real quickly, I want to
That's a public hearing on the...
correct myself earlier. I said to you, Cindy, I said, we'll talk about that after, and I'm realizing I don't want to violate any
Yeah, you
open
can't do
meeting
that.
laws.
I don't
So
remember what it was, too.
I do.
Oh.
So December 11th, I just need to know the time
Oh, sure.
and the place.
So that's the planning board meeting on the bylaw update.
Uh-huh.
And are you linked into My Town Government and getting notices of certain committees when they're meeting? Are you getting that on an email?
No, I'm just looking
Okay.
at the calendar and,
I'm pretty sure that it's scheduled for December 11th, 7 o'clock here. And it might be downstairs and it might be upstairs, and I can't tell you, it depends on what else is.
well, December 11th at 7. It's not that big a building, I'll find it.
Oh, yeah, that's true. But you can also go into mytowngovernment.org and look at the planning board meetings and be triply sure. And I say that, Jim, because I'm out of town, starting day after tomorrow for 10 days, out of the country. So I don't want to be responsible for trying to remember to tell you.
No, you're not responsible for
Okay.
it. I wouldn't put that on anybody.
With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
All in favor?
Aye.